The evening had started the way I always dreamed it would. The lights in my small suburban dining room glowed softly against the walls I had painted myself 10 years earlier, back when my wife, Margaret, was still alive and the sound of her humming filled the house. Now, it was just me most nights, me and the silence, but tonight was different. Tonight, my daughter Grace was home. And she had brought someone with her. Someone important. Her fiancé. I sat at the head of the long oak table, the one I had bought decades ago at a discount furniture store when money was tight. Back then, I imagined it holding decades of family meals, birthdays, Thanksgivings, Christmases. But in truth, it had mostly held bills, loneliness, and the weight of a father's regrets. Still, tonight, it looked alive again. Grace had decorated it with candles, flowers, and her own laughter. Grace's laughter, it was music I hadn't heard in years. She was 32 now, grown, confident, and in love. The kind of love that makes a father both proud and nervous. The kind of love that blinds you to everything else. She leaned against the tall, well-dressed young man sitting beside her, her eyes lit with a fire that reminded me of her mother's. "Dad, this is Etienne," she had said earlier, almost breathless with pride. "He's from Lyon. He's wonderful. He wanted to meet you." Etienne. His handshake was firm, his English was nearly flawless, and his smile. His smile was the kind that had fooled people all his life. Charming, polite, almost disarming. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who thought the world owed him something, though he hid it well beneath layers of foreign charm. And for a while, I allowed myself to believe him. I studied him the way old men study the weather, quietly, carefully, as if predicting a storm before the clouds even roll in. He spoke of France, of his studies, of how much he adored my daughter. He told me I had raised a remarkable woman, and I almost wanted to believe him. Almost. Dinner was warm. Roast chicken with rosemary, potatoes mashed the way Grace liked them, and wine I hadn't opened in years. It almost felt like family again. I smiled, nodded, even laughed at his stories. I wanted this to work. I wanted my daughter to be happy. But then it happened. It was subtle. The kind of thing no one else would notice if they didn't know the language. He leaned just slightly toward his parents, who had flown in from Paris and sat across the table, elegant and composed. His voice lowered, not enough to be secret, but enough to be intimate. He spoke in French. And though Grace never learned the language beyond a few phrases, I had. Decades ago, stationed overseas in the military, I picked it up. Later, after Margaret passed, I returned to it, reading French books, watching French news, keeping my mind sharp because the body had started to betray me. So when his words came, I heard them clearly. Crystal clear. "This old loser's daughter is perfect for getting a green card." The words didn't shatter the room. No, the room carried on, Grace laughing, his parents nodding politely, the sound of forks on plates. But inside me, everything went silent. I looked at him, this tall, smug man sitting at my table, eating my food, smiling at my daughter as though she was nothing more than a ticket into the country I had fought for, worked in, bled in. My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. 68 years of life had taught me the art of patience. I had been a husband, a father, a worker, a soldier, a provider. I had swallowed insults from bosses, buried my dreams so my children could chase theirs, and carried the weight of everyone else's needs on my shoulders. If I had learned one thing in life, it was this: you don't react right away. You wait. You plan. So I smiled. I laughed at a story Grace told. I poured more wine into his glass. My daughter didn't notice a thing. She was glowing, blinded by love, by hope, by the fantasy of the future she thought she had with him. I played the role of the doting father perfectly. Inside, though, I was already planning. The meal wound down. Plates were cleared. His parents complimented the dinner in careful English, and Grace kissed my cheek, proud of the night she had created. I stood, my joints aching but my spine still straight, and I looked at Etienne. And in his language, his secret weapon, his arrogance, I spoke. Slowly, clearly, deliberately. "It was nice to meet you," I said in French. My voice was calm, almost tender. "I'm sure the immigration service will be too." The effect was immediate. His mother's hand trembled, her fork clattering against her plate. His father's face drained of color. And Etienne himself, Etienne went pale, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Then, before anyone could process it, he collapsed. Fainted. Right there on my dining room floor. Grace screamed. She rushed to his side, cradling him, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad, what did you say? What happened?" she demanded, looking at me with a mixture of fear and anger. I stood there, my hands steady, my face unreadable. For a moment, I saw Margaret in her eyes, the way she used to look at me when she wanted answers I wasn't ready to give. I didn't speak. Not yet. Because I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. The man on my floor wasn't just after my daughter. He was after her future, her safety, her heart. And I had spent my entire life giving everything I had to protect the people I loved. I wasn't about to stop now. But the question hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Would my daughter believe me, or the man she thought she loved? I didn't sleep that night. Grace had rushed Etienne to the guest room, fussing over him like a nurse, whispering in his ear, stroking his hair. His parents whispered among themselves in rapid French, throwing occasional worried glances in my direction. They had seen me, heard me, and they knew I wasn't a fool. But Grace only saw the man she loved lying pale and still, as though my words had struck him like a physical blow. And maybe they had. I sat in my armchair long after the house fell silent, staring at the photographs on the mantel. My wife, Margaret, smiling with Grace in her arms. My son, Peter, standing awkwardly in his graduation gown. My younger self, in uniform, his eyes bright and his back unbowed. It all felt so far away. I closed my eyes and let the years pull me backward, to the beginning. I was 23 when I first met Margaret. She was 21, working in a small diner in Ohio where I stopped on my way home from the army base. I was just another young man with short hair and tired eyes, but when she looked at me, it was as though she saw something worth noticing. Something worth saving. "Coffee?" she asked, her smile brighter than anything I'd seen in months. That smile became my anchor. My reason. We married within a year. Our first home was nothing more than a run-down rental with a leaky roof and a lawn more weeds than grass, but we made it ours. I worked long shifts at the steel mill, came home reeking of sweat and iron, and still, she would wrap her arms around me as if I'd returned from war itself. When Grace was born, I remember holding her so carefully, afraid she might break in my hands. She had Margaret's eyes, that same spark of life that could melt the hardest stone. From the very beginning, I promised myself that no matter what this world threw at me, I would make sure my daughter had more than I ever did. And I kept that promise. I worked overtime, picked up weekend shifts, missed birthdays and holidays. Also Grace could have new shoes for school, piano lessons she begged for, the college education she dreamed of. Margaret used to tell me I was pushing too hard, that I should take care of myself, but I shrugged it off. My body was strong. My spirit was stronger. Or so I thought. Life has a way of testing promises. When Grace was 13, I lost my job at the mill. Automation, they called it. A fancy word for men like me being tossed aside. We lived off my small pension and whatever part-time work I could scrounge, but the weight of failure pressed down on me every day. I saw it in Margaret's tired smile, in the way Grace lowered her eyes when I couldn't afford the field trips other kids went on. I felt useless. But Margaret never let me drown in that shame. She picked up shifts at the diner again, came home with aching feet, and still told me we were fine. "We'll get through this," she whispered at night, her hand on my chest. We did. Eventually, I found work as a school custodian. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Grace never complained, though I saw the change in her. The spark dimmed, replaced by a hunger to escape. She worked harder at school, pushed herself, and when she got into college, she cried tears of joy. I cried too, though mine were mixed with the pain of knowing I'd be paying off loans for years just to give her the chance. Still, it was worth it. Every sacrifice was worth it. Then came the worst day of my life. Margaret had been feeling tired, but she waved it off as stress. By the time she saw a doctor, it was too late. Cancer. Aggressive. Ruthless. She lasted 6 months. I watched the love of my life wither away before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. Grace was 20 then, in the middle of her studies, and I tried to be strong for her. But when Margaret passed, a part of me died with her. The house grew silent. The meals grew cold. I became a shadow of the man I once was. But I had no choice. Grace needed me. So I pushed through the grief, shoved it down into the quiet corners of my heart, and kept moving. It wasn't long after Margaret's death that I noticed the distance growing between Grace and me. She visited less, called less, always busy with classes, then with work, then with her own life. I told myself it was normal, that children grow up, that this was the way of things. But deep down, I felt the hollow space where her presence used to be. When she finally introduced me to Etienne, I felt both relief and fear. Relief that she hadn't forgotten me completely, that she wanted me to be part of her life. Fear because I knew, fathers always know, that this man would change everything. And I was right. I opened my eyes, pulled back to the present. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I rose slowly from my chair, joints stiff, and walked back into the dining room. The candles had burned down to nubs. The plate still sat in the sink, untouched since the chaos. I stood at the table where it had all unraveled. I thought of Margaret. She would have known what to do. She always did. She had the kind of wisdom that could cut through any storm. But she wasn't here. It was just me. Me, and my daughter who believed I had just attacked the man she loved. Me, and a stranger lying in my guest room, plotting to take her future from her. I pressed my hand against the table, steadying myself. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was steel. I had sacrificed everything for my family, and I wasn't about to let some smooth-talking foreigner undo it all. But how could I make Grace see the truth? How could I reach her before it was too late? As I turned out the lights and climbed the stairs to my empty bed, one thought circled in my mind, relentless and unyielding. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after the dinner was heavy with silence. I awoke before dawn, as I always did. Old habits die hard. Decades of rising before the sun to work, to serve, to provide had carved themselves into my bones. But instead of pulling on work boots or grabbing a lunch pail, I stood at the window, watching the street lamps flicker against the quiet road. The world was asleep, but my mind wasn't. Grace didn't come down until late morning. Her hair was tangled, her eyes swollen from crying. She gave me the kind of look that sliced deeper than words ever could, half anger, half disappointment. "Dad," she said softly, "you embarrassed him. You embarrassed all of us." The words hit like a hammer. I wanted to shout, to tell her everything, to scream the truth into her ears until she finally understood. But I didn't. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my black coffee, and stared at her the way a father does when he knows no matter what he says, his daughter has already chosen her side. "He's not what you think, Grace," I said finally. My voice was calm, steady, though my heart pounded like a drum. "You don't even know him," she snapped. But I did. I knew men like him. I'd met them in bars overseas, in offices back home, in factories and schools. Men who used their smiles like weapons, who saw people not as souls but as stepping stones. And I wasn't about to let my daughter become one of them. Grace didn't linger. She grabbed her coat, muttered something about getting fresh air, and stormed out. Etienne's parents had already gone, taking their whispers and worried glances with them. The house was empty again. Empty but for me and the weight of what I had to do. I started small. In my younger days, I had neither the luxury nor the time to pry into people's lives. But age had given me patience, and patience had taught me observation. So I began to watch Etienne, not openly, not in ways Grace would notice, but quietly, like a hunter waiting for his prey to make the wrong move. When he finally emerged from the guest room, pale but alive, he offered me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his accent coating every syllable, "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond. I simply studied him. He shifted under my gaze, adjusting his shirt cuff, clearing his throat. "You misunderstood," he tried again. "My words, they were not meant the way you think." But I had heard the way he smirked when he said them. I had seen the gleam of arrogance in his eyes. No man accidentally calls another's daughter perfect for a green card. Still, I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the loudest weapon. That afternoon, while Grace tended to Etienne like he was a wounded soldier, I drove into town. My old pickup rattled with every bump, the radio long broken, but it carried me faithfully, like it always had. First stop was the library. Not many people my age still went there, but I trusted the quiet, the smell of old paper, the kind librarians who still believed information was power. I sat at a computer, squinting at the screen, and began my search. Etienne Dupont. Lyon, France. Graduate student. Entrepreneur. His name popped up in a dozen places, polished profiles full of charm. But there were cracks. Credit issues in Europe. A failed business venture. An old photo of him with another woman, her arm wrapped tightly around his waist, her ring flashing in the light. Married. Divorced. Nothing clear. I scribbled notes in a worn notebook, my handwriting shaky but determined. The more I read, the more my stomach twisted. He wasn't just a charming foreigner looking for love. He was a man running from failure, chasing opportunity. And my daughter was his opportunity. Back home, I found Grace in the kitchen, stirring soup for Etienne. She looked up at me, her eyes hopeful, as if begging me to approve. "He's resting," she said softly. "He just needs time, Dad. He's been under so much pressure." Pressure. That's what she called it. I called it deceit. But I didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, I kissed her forehead and told her to rest. And when the house grew quiet again, I slipped into the guest room. Etienne slept with one arm thrown across his chest, the picture of false innocence. On the nightstand sat his phone. I knew it was wrong, but wrong didn't matter anymore. Protecting my daughter mattered. I picked it up, careful not to wake him, and slipped outside to the porch. The phone was locked, of course. But even locked phones betray their secrets. Notifications glowed on the screen. Messages in French from numbers I didn't recognize. One, when translated, read, "The papers must be signed before January. Do not fail this time." My hands shook as I copied it into my notebook. This wasn't love. This was business. For the next week, I played the role of the quiet father, the old man too tired to fight. Grace saw me as stubborn, maybe bitter, but not dangerous. And that gave me room to work. I spoke to old friends, men who still had connections in immigration offices, law enforcement, even the military. I didn't ask for much, just information. And the information came. Slowly, piece by piece, like a puzzle revealing its picture. Etienne had tried to come to the U.S. before. A work visa denied. A student visa that barely lasted a year. There were whispers of fraud, whispers of manipulation. Nothing that would land him in prison, but enough to paint a picture. Enough to tell me my daughter was his way in. One night, I sat at the table again, staring at Margaret's photograph. I spoke aloud, as if she were still there. "What would you do, Maggie?" I whispered. "How do I save her without losing her?" The photograph didn't answer, but I could almost hear her voice. "Quietly, James. Always quietly. Let him trap himself." So I waited, and the trap began to close. It was a Sunday when Etienne slipped. He and Grace had returned from town, her arm hooked in his, her smile wide. He played his role perfectly, kissing her cheek, thanking me for dinner, even offering to help wash the dishes. But when Grace went upstairs, I heard him on the phone. French again. Confident, smug. "Yes," he said, pacing my living room. "She trusts me completely. The old man. He's nothing. Just a relic. By spring, the marriage will be done, and the papers will follow. It is perfect." I stood in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, every word cutting into me like glass. When he hung up, I stepped forward. He froze, realizing too late I had been there the whole time. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just looked at him the way only a father can look at the man who thinks he's outsmarted him. And in that silence, he knew. He knew the game had changed. But Grace didn't know. Not yet. And that was the hardest part. That night, lying in bed, I thought about every sacrifice I had ever made. The hours, the sweat, the broken body, the empty wallet, all for my children. And now, after everything, the greatest test wasn't whether I could fight him. It was whether I could keep from losing her. I closed my eyes, and a plan began to form. Not loud, not angry, quiet, patient, unshakable. Because this wasn't just about revenge. This was about love. And I wasn't about to lose. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm I could not stop. Grace grew more distant with every sunrise. She spent her mornings with Etienne, her afternoons taking him around town, and her evenings whispering with him in corners I could not reach. She was glowing, radiant, as if she had finally found her place in the world. But I knew better. I watched her laugh at his stories, hold his hand like it was her lifeline, and defend him whenever I so much as raised a brow. My daughter, the girl I had raised through scraped knees and broken hearts, was slipping away from me. And no matter what I said, she would not hear it. "Dad," she said one night as we cleared the dishes, "I need you to stop being so suspicious. You're scaring him." I nearly laughed. Scaring him? A man who smirked behind my back, who plotted in another language, who saw her as a ticket instead of a treasure. If anyone should have been scared, it was her. But I didn't laugh. I just said, "Grace, love doesn't hide. It doesn't need to." She slammed the dish into the sink, her eyes wet. "You don't understand. You never understand." And she walked away. At night, I sat in my armchair again, the weight of Margaret's absence pressing against my chest. How she would have handled this with grace, with patience, with a touch that soothed instead of warned. I was never good with softness. I knew only how to protect by standing firm, and firm was the last thing Grace wanted. But I couldn't back down. Not now. I went back to the library, back to the notebooks filled with scribbled notes, translations, names. I pored over immigration laws, deadlines, processes. I learned more in those hours than I ever had in school. If Etienne thought age made me weak, he had forgotten what a lifetime of survival teaches a man. I called in favors. Old army friends, men I hadn't spoken to in decades, answered my calls. One, retired from immigration services, confirmed what I suspected. Men like Etienne slipped through cracks all the time, marrying citizens for green cards. Some got caught, most didn't. But the law was clear. If proven, the punishment was swift. The challenge wasn't the law. The challenge was Grace. She had to see it herself. The first crack appeared on a Wednesday afternoon. I came home from the grocery store to find Grace crying on the porch. Her face was in her hands, her shoulders shaking. My heart clenched at the sight of her, the little girl who once cried over broken toys, now crying over something I couldn't yet name. "Sweetheart," I said softly, setting down the bags. "What happened?" She shook her head, wiping her tears quickly. "Nothing. It's nothing." But her voice cracked, and I knew. Later that evening, as I fixed the leaking faucet in the kitchen, I heard them. Grace and Etienne, arguing upstairs. His voice was sharp, angry, spitting words in French she didn't understand. Hers was softer, pleading, defensive. I couldn't catch every word, but I caught enough. He was angry about money, about papers, about her obligations. When the argument ended, she came downstairs with red eyes. Etienne followed, his face smooth again, his arms sliding around her shoulders. "Everything is fine," he said, looking at me too directly. "Just a misunderstanding." But I had seen the look in Grace's eyes. The first seed of doubt. That night, when Grace was asleep, I slipped outside. The autumn air was cold, crisp, biting against my skin, but it cleared my head. I dialed an old friend, Leonard, who had once been a police detective. He owed me a favor, and I called it in. "I need a background check," I said quietly, "on a French national named Etienne Dupont. Anything you can find." Leonard whistled low. "You're playing with fire, James. You sure you want this?" I looked back at the house, where the warm lights glowed in Grace's window. "I don't have a choice." 2 days later, Leonard called me back. "You were right to worry," he said. His voice was grave. "Your boy's got a trail. Nothing major on record here, but overseas? Failed businesses, debts, and, listen carefully, he was married. 3 years ago. Still might be. Divorce papers don't show. The ground shifted beneath me. Married. I thanked Leonard, hung up, and sat in silence. My hands trembled as I folded the note into my pocket. Proof. Not suspicion. Not paranoia. Proof. But how would I show Grace without breaking her heart? The chance came sooner than I expected. Saturday night, Etienne went out, claiming he was meeting a business contact. Grace stayed behind, curled on the couch with me, watching one of those romantic dramas she loved. Halfway through, she fell asleep, her head on my shoulder, just like when she was a little girl. I slipped her phone from the coffee table, opened the photos she had taken of her and Etienne. I scrolled through them, smiling sadly at her joy, until one caught my eye. It was a picture of Etienne in a suit, standing at what looked like a wedding. The background wasn't ours, and the woman beside him wasn't Grace. She was dark-haired, smiling wide, and her hand rested on his chest like she belonged there. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just rumor. It was real. I snapped a photo of it with my own phone, slipped hers back, and sat there in the dim light of the TV. When Grace woke, I kissed her forehead, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I decided to test him. Over breakfast, I casually said in French, "Your wife in Lyon must miss you." The fork slipped from his hand. His eyes widened just a fraction before he caught himself. "I don't know what you mean," he said quickly, switching back to English. But Grace noticed. She looked between us, confusion dawning. "What did you say, Dad?" she asked. I shook my head, forcing a smile. Just a thought. But she wasn't convinced. I saw it, the flicker of doubt growing brighter. Later that day, I heard them again, arguing. Grace's voice was sharp this time, demanding answers. His was defensive, slippery, desperate. And then the slam of a door. Grace came downstairs, pale, shaken. She didn't speak, didn't meet my eyes. She just walked out into the autumn air, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking world. I let her go. Sometimes, the only way to help is to let the storm rage. That night, Etienne came to me. "You are destroying her," he hissed, his accent thickening. "You want her alone, miserable, chained to her old man." I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes steady on his. "No," I said quietly. "I want her safe. And I will make sure of it." His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw the mask slip. The smugness cracked, replaced by raw, simmering anger. And I knew then, this battle was only beginning. I woke to the sound of raised voices. At first, I thought it was the television left on in the living room, but when I listened closely, I realized it was them, Grace and Etienne. Their argument was sharp, cutting through the early morning silence like knives. I didn't move from my bed. I just listened. "I don't understand why my father keeps looking at you like that." Grace's voice was trembling. "He's suspicious all the time, and now he's saying things that don't make sense. He is jealous." Etienne barked back, his accent thick with anger. "He wants to keep you here, in this small life, chained to his chair. He doesn't want you to be happy." The words burned. Jealous? Me? I had sacrificed everything, my back, my youth, my dreams, for her happiness. And now this man dared to twist it into something ugly. But then I heard Grace's voice again, softer, uncertain. You still haven't explained that picture. The woman at the wedding. Who was she?" Silence. Then his voice, low and sharp. "She is nobody. A cousin. You believe your father's lies before you believe me? I am the man who loves you, Grace. Not him." I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the blanket. This was the battle I had dreaded. He was clever, pulling her heartstrings, making me the enemy. And Grace, poor Grace, was caught in the middle. Later that morning, the kitchen was icy with silence. Grace sat across from me, her spoon untouched in her bowl. Etienne poured himself coffee as though nothing had happened. Finally, Grace broke. "Dad," she whispered, "I need you to stop digging into him. I need you to let us live our lives." I looked at her, really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes. The way her hand trembled as she held the spoon. She was exhausted, torn in two. "Grace," I said softly, "sometimes love blinds us. Sometimes it makes us see what we want instead of what is real. Please, look closer." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why can't you just be happy for me?" And she ran from the table. Etienne lingered a moment, staring at me with a smug grin. Then he leaned in, his words just above a whisper. "She will choose me. You are old, alone, forgotten. When we marry, you will watch from your empty chair, and she will not come back." I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, was stronger than any insult. But inside, the fire was burning. If he thought I was finished, he was wrong. That afternoon, I drove to see Leonard again. He had printed files, thick with information, and slid them across the table in the small diner where we met. "Here it is," he said. "Proof of marriage back in France. No divorce record. And debts, more than you want to know. This guy is poison." I opened the folder, my hand steady as I looked through the papers. A marriage certificate. Financial reports. Even a photograph of Etienne and the woman from the wedding. It was all there. "Thank you," I said quietly. But Leonard leaned closer. "James, be careful. Men like him, they don't go down easy. If you embarrass him, he'll drag Grace through the mud with him. You want him out, you need to do it smart. Smart. Quiet. Patient." I nodded. When I returned home, Grace was gone, but Etienne was waiting. He leaned against the porch, arms folded, his smile sharp as a blade. "You dig, old man," he said in French. "You dig and dig. But you will bury yourself, not me." I stepped closer, holding his gaze. "You underestimate me," I replied in the same language. "You see an old man. What you don't see is the years of patience. The years of sacrifice. You've never had to fight for anything in your life. But I have. And I will not lose her to you." For the first time, his smile faltered. That night, I laid out the papers on my table. The evidence was clear, undeniable. But showing it to Grace too soon would only drive her further into his arms. I needed her to see him fall with her own eyes. So I began to weave the trap. The first step was small. I called the immigration office anonymously, asking questions, dropping his name into conversations. The second step was reaching out to a friend of Margaret's, a lawyer who had always admired my wife's kindness. She agreed to help quietly, setting up a way to report fraudulent marriages. The third step was patience. I waited. I watched. And slowly, Etienne began to crack. A week later, Grace and Etienne had dinner with his parents again. I didn't join. Instead, I stayed home, pacing the living room, my stomach churning. When they returned, Grace went straight upstairs, her face pale, her eyes red. Etienne followed slowly, his jaw tight. I waited until she was gone before asking, "What happened?" He sneered. "She asked too many questions. About money. About France. About the past. I told her she was being paranoid. I told her this was your poison. You put doubts in her head." I leaned back in my chair, my face calm. "Good," I said softly. His eyes narrowed. "Good." "Yes," I said, standing. "Because doubt grows. It takes root. And soon, she will see you for who you are." He cursed in French and stormed upstairs. I smiled. For the first time in months, I smiled. Over the next few days, I began to notice the shift. Grace asked me questions, small at first, careful, but enough to show she was searching. "Dad, do you really think he could lie like that?" she whispered one night as we folded laundry together. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "men who love you don't need secrets." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she nodded. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. We were all at the table again, the storm pounding against the windows, when Etienne's phone buzzed. He answered quickly, speaking in hushed French. But the storm was loud, and he raised his voice without realizing. "Once the papers are signed, the money is ours. She believes everything. The old man is nothing." The room froze. Grace's fork clattered against her plate. She stared at him, her lips trembling. What did you just say?" He stammered, switching back to English. "Nothing, my love. You misunderstand." But it was too late. I met her eyes, steady, unflinching. And I saw it, the moment the last veil fell from her. The moment she saw him as he truly was. She rose from the table, shaking, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How could you?" she whispered. Etienne reached for her, but she pulled back. And I knew then, the trap was closing. But it wasn't finished yet. Because a man like him doesn't walk away quietly. No, he would fight. He would cling. He would lash out. And I was ready. The storm outside lasted through the night, but the real storm was inside our walls. Grace didn't sleep. I could hear her pacing in her room, then falling into sobs, then pacing again. I stood by my window, watching the lightning split the sky, thinking of Margaret. She would have known what to say to our daughter. She would have known how to hold her without words. But me, I was clumsy with comfort. My hands were built for work, not for healing hearts. Still, I knew one thing. I couldn't let Etienne twist her pain into another trap. In the morning, Etienne tried. He stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. When Grace walked in, her hair still damp from a shower that had done nothing to hide her swollen eyes, he reached for her hand. "Grace, listen. You misunderstood me. I was speaking about business. My parents' estate. My uncle owes money. That is all." But she pulled her hand back. "Stop lying." His jaw tightened, but he softened his tone. "You are tired. You are hurt. He jerked his chin toward me. "He is poisoning you against me." Grace's lip trembled, but she shook her head. "You said it. I heard you. Don't you dare blame my father." For the first time since I had met him, Etienne's mask cracked wide open. His face twisted in rage, his accent thick and harsh. "You stupid American girl. You think you are so special. You are nothing. Without me, you are just a daughter to a dying old man." The words rang out like a slap. Grace froze, her eyes wide with shock. I stepped between them before she could crumble. My voice was steady, low. "Get out," I told him. He sneered. "This is her house too. You cannot make me leave." But Grace whispered, her voice broken but strong enough, "Go, Etienne." That was when I knew something inside her had shifted forever. He didn't leave, not really. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled, but I knew he'd be back. Men like him didn't walk away from control so easily. Grace sat at the table, her head in her hands. I poured her tea, sliding the cup in front of her the way Margaret used to. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "this isn't your fault. Love makes us blind. But blindness doesn't mean weakness. You see him now. That's what matters." She nodded through tears. "I loved him, Dad. I thought he saw me." My chest ached at her words. "He saw you, Grace. But only as a means to something else. That's not love. That's theft." She reached for my hand. "What do we do now?" I held her hand tightly. "Now, we let him finish the job of destroying himself. And we'll be ready when he does." For the next 2 days, the house was tense, filled with silence and waiting. Grace moved like a ghost, going to work, coming home, avoiding calls from Etienne. But he wasn't gone. I saw his car down the street one evening, headlights off, watching. I found a cigarette but near the mailbox, French tobacco. He was circling, restless, dangerous. That's when I made my move. I met with Margaret's friend, the lawyer, again. She explained the process, how immigration would investigate, how fraud could ruin not just his application but his record for life. I handed over the files Leonard had given me. "This is enough," she said, scanning the papers. "If he pushes for marriage, we'll have him cornered." Good, I thought. Let him try. The final crack came at Grace's office. She told me later, her voice trembling with the memory, that he showed up unannounced. He stormed into the lobby, shouting her name, demanding she come with him. When she refused, he grabbed her arm, hard enough to leave a bruise. Her co-workers called security. He was dragged out, yelling in French, swearing he'd ruin her, ruin me, ruin everything. When she came home that evening, her arms swollen, she collapsed into my arms the way she hadn't since she was a child. I held her, rocking her gently, whispering, "It's over, Grace. It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not yet. That night, as the rain started again, Etienne returned. I heard the pounding on the door just after midnight. Grace was asleep upstairs, exhausted from the day. I opened the door, and there he was, wild-eyed, soaked from the storm, his clothes clinging to him. "You," he spat. "You destroyed her against me. You ruined everything." I kept my voice calm. "Go home, Etienne, before you make this worse." He stepped closer, his breath reeking of liquor. "You think you are clever? You think you can stop me? I will marry her, I will have my papers, and you will rot here alone." I met his rage with silence. Then, in his own language, I said, "You've already lost." For a moment, the words stunned him. Then he lunged, grabbing my shirt, shoving me back against the wall. His fist trembled at my chin, his eyes blazing with fury. And then, Grace's voice rang out. "Stop!" She was at the top of the stairs, pale, shaking, but with a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "If you ever touch him again, I swear I'll call the police. We're done, Etienne. Do you hear me? Done." He froze. His eyes flicked from her to me, then back again. And for the first time, I saw fear in him, not of me, but of the fact that Grace's love had finally slipped from his grasp. He shoved me away and stormed out into the rain. The door slammed shut, rattling in its frame. Grace rushed to me, tears streaming. "Dad, what if he doesn't stop?" I pulled her close, holding her against me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "Then we finish this," I whispered. "Once and for all." But as I stood there in the dark, listening to the rain swallow his footsteps, I knew this wasn't over. Etienne was cornered now. And cornered men don't retreat quietly. They strike. And I would be ready when he did. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Grace moved through the house like a shadow, her eyes tired, her hands restless. She wanted to believe it was over, but both of us knew it wasn't. Men like Etienne don't let go. They grip tighter the moment they start losing. I kept a watchful eye. Each evening, I checked the locks twice. Each morning, I scanned the street before stepping outside. And every night, before bed, I whispered Margaret's name, asking her to watch over our daughter from wherever she was. But even prayers can't stop storms. It was Friday when it happened. Grace had gone to work, insisting she didn't want him to control her life. I was proud of her courage, but I couldn't rest easy. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was her number. When I answered, I heard her breathing, fast and ragged. "Dad," she whispered. "He's here." My stomach dropped. "Where?" "At the office. He's waiting outside. They called security again, but he won't leave. He says if I don't talk to him, he'll come to the house." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "Stay inside, Grace. Don't open that door. I'll handle this." When I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Fear was gone. In its place was something sharper, resolve. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for. I drove downtown, the folder of evidence on the passenger seat. The streets blurred past, rain spattering the windshield. My heart thudded, steady and strong, as though reminding me that I still had work left to do. When I arrived, I saw him immediately. Etienne leaned against a lamppost outside Grace's building, his suit wrinkled, his hair slicked with rain. He looked less like the polished fiancé I'd first met and more like a cornered animal. I parked across the street, stepped out, and walked toward him. He saw me and smirked. "Ah, the old watchdog. Here to bark again." "Not bark," I said calmly. "Just to end this." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "End this? You cannot end me. She still loves me. She still doubts you." But I saw the twitch in his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. His words were bravado, nothing more. "Grace doesn't doubt me any more," I said quietly. "She heard you with her own ears. And soon, others will hear you too." I held up the folder. His smirk faltered. "What is that?" he snapped. "Your past," I answered. "Your wife in France. Your debts. Your lies. It's all here. And tomorrow, it will be in the hands of immigration." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then his face twisted with fury. He lunged, grabbing the folder, but I held firm. "Don't," I warned. But he didn't stop. He shoved me hard against the wall of the building, his fist raised. And that's when the security guard appeared. "Hey!" the man barked, rushing forward. Etienne froze, breathing hard, his fist still trembling in the air. Slowly, he stepped back, glaring at me with venom in his eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll regret this." "No," I said firmly, brushing off my coat. "You will." Grace came rushing out then, her co-workers behind her. She threw her arms around me, shaking. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I murmured, holding her close. Her eyes darted to Etienne, who stood fuming, his hands clenched at his sides. For the first time, she didn't look at him with love, or even sadness. She looked at him with disgust. "Go," she said coldly. "I never want to see you again." Etienne's mouth opened, but no words came. He turned on his heel and stalked away, his shoulders hunched against the rain. Grace buried her face in my chest. I stroked her hair, whispering, "It's over now, sweetheart. It's over." But inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't over until the papers were filed. Until the law had its hold on him. Until he had no power left to twist. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the folder spread out before me. Grace was upstairs, finally asleep. The house was quiet, but I couldn't rest. I read every page again, marriage certificates, debt records, photographs. Each piece was a nail in the coffin he had built for himself. And yet, my heart ached. Not for him, but for Grace. For the betrayal she had endured, for the love that had been nothing but a lie. I thought of Margaret again, of the nights we stayed up late, whispering about our children's futures. She had dreamed of weddings, of grandchildren, of laughter filling the house. I wondered what she would think of this mess, of this fight. Then I realized, she would tell me to fight harder. For Grace. For the truth. So I made my plan. Tomorrow morning, I would drive to the immigration office. I would hand over the file. And Etienne's game would end. But the night had one more test for me. At 2 a.m., I heard it, the sound of glass shattering downstairs. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and rushed down. The living room window was broken, shards glittering on the floor. And there, standing in the shadows, was Etienne. His eyes were wild, his hands shaking. "You ruined me," he shouted. "You think you can take everything from me? I will not go back to France like a dog." I tightened my grip on the bat. "Leave, Etienne. This is your last warning." But he didn't move. He stepped closer, his face twisted with rage. "You think you are strong because you are old? Because you have nothing left to lose? But I—" His words cut off as headlights flashed through the window. A car pulled up outside, the police. Grace had called them. Within minutes, 2 officers were in the house, handcuffing him as he shouted curses in French, spittle flying from his mouth. They dragged him out into the rain, his screams fading into the night. Grace stood behind me, clutching my arm, her face pale but resolute. "Dad," she whispered, "is it really over now?" I looked out at Etienne, being shoved into the back of the police car. I thought of the folder upstairs, of the appointment I had tomorrow. "Almost," I said quietly. "Almost." When the car drove away and silence returned, Grace turned to me, tears streaking her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For saving me." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly. "You don't need saving, Grace. You just needed to see the truth. And now you have." She nodded against my chest, her body trembling. As I stood there in the quiet house, the broken glass still crunching under our feet, I knew the final chapter was coming. Not just for Etienne, but for me too. Because tomorrow, when I walked into that office with the folder, it wouldn't just be the end of his story. It would be the beginning of hers. Morning sunlight spilled through the cracked blinds, warm but pale, like a promise of something better. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the folder of papers beside me. Grace was upstairs, still asleep. She had cried herself into exhaustion after the police dragged Etienne out last night. I didn't wake her. Some battles a father must fight alone. I slid the folder into my worn leather briefcase, the same one I had carried to work decades ago, when my back was younger and my dreams were louder. Funny, I thought. That bag had once held blueprints and contracts. Now it carried the truth, the kind that could shatter a man's lies forever. The immigration office was quiet when I arrived, its sterile white walls and buzzing lights reminding me of a hospital. A young officer with tired eyes took my name and led me to a desk where an older woman in a navy blazer sat. She looked like she had seen every trick in the book. "Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked. I nodded, sliding the folder across the desk. "It's about a man named Etienne Moreau. He's trying to marry my daughter for a green card." She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents with sharp precision. As the minutes ticked by, her face hardened. Finally, she looked up. "This is serious. Fraud. Bigamy. Debts. Thank you for bringing this to us, Mr. Hawthorne. We'll take it from here." Her words should have lifted a weight off my chest, but instead, I felt a heaviness. It was done. The fight I had been preparing for was no longer mine to finish. Still, when I walked out of that building, the autumn air felt different, lighter, freer. Grace was waiting for me when I got home. She sat on the porch steps, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes puffy but clear. "You went, didn't you?" she asked softly. I sat beside her, nodding. "It's done. They'll investigate, and he won't be able to touch you again." Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I whispered. "That's what fathers do." For a long while, we sat in silence, watching the leaves fall from the trees. But peace is never simple. 2 weeks later, the storm came back, this time in the form of a courtroom. Etienne had been arrested for trespassing and assault, but his lawyer argued for bail. The judge granted it, though heavily restricted. I sat in the back of the courtroom with Grace, watching him in his suit, his hair slicked back, trying to wear the mask of sophistication again. But the mask didn't fit anymore. Not after the evidence had surfaced. Not after the whispers began, about his wife in France, his debts, his schemes. Grace squeezed my hand as the judge declared him barred from contacting her. Etienne glanced back at us, his eyes dark with hatred. "You think you've won," he hissed as the bailiff led him away. "But this is not the end." Grace flinched. But I didn't. Because I knew something he didn't. The end wasn't his to write. It was mine. The final blow came on a gray Tuesday morning. I was sitting with Grace at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. It was the immigration officer. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice brisk but almost triumphant, "we completed the investigation. Etienne Moreau committed marriage fraud previously in France, and there's proof he attempted it here. His visa has been revoked. He'll be deported within the month." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Thank you." Grace stared at me when I hung up. Her hands shook. "He's gone." I nodded. "He will be." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she burst into tears, loud, aching sobs that tore through her chest. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she shook. "He almost ruined me," she whispered. "But he didn't," I said firmly. "Because you are stronger than he ever knew." Weeks passed. The leaves gave way to winter frost, and slowly, Grace began to heal. She laughed again, though not as often. She went back to work, though she carried a scar of caution in her eyes. But she was standing, living, surviving. One evening, as we decorated the tree together, she looked at me and said, "You know, when Mom died, I thought I'd never feel safe again. But you kept me safe, Dad. You always do." Her words broke me open in a way nothing else had. I turned away, wiping at my eyes, pretending to fix an ornament. Because she was wrong. I hadn't kept her safe from everything. But I had kept her safe from him. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The last time I saw Etienne was by accident. I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted him across the street, flanked by 2 officers. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked smaller somehow, less dangerous, like a man stripped of his illusions. He saw me. For a moment, our eyes locked. I expected hatred. I expected rage. But all I saw was defeat. And I realized then, I didn't hate him. I pitied him. A man who had everything handed to him but never learned what it meant to earn love, to keep it, to protect it. I turned away, climbed into my car, and drove home. Back to Grace. Back to life. Back to peace. That night, as I sat in my chair by the fire, Grace curled up on the couch with a blanket, reading. I looked at her, at the quiet calm that had finally returned to our home, and I thought of Margaret again. "I did it," I whispered into the flames. "She's safe. You can rest easy now." The fire crackled, warm and steady, like a heartbeat. And for the first time in years, I let myself rest too. Because sometimes, victory doesn't come with shouts or cheers. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, the sound of your daughter breathing peacefully in the next room, the weight of justice carried not by revenge but by truth, and the knowledge that you have given your child the one thing no one else could. A safe tomorrow. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.